All right, we're at book Matthew, chapter number 26. We're going to start at verse number 47. We've actually gone through those verses, first 3 or 4 verses, a little bit already. But we're in the section where Jesus is being betrayed. And as we're reading this section, it's kind of hard to start right in the middle. So let's back up to verse number 47. I may stop and comment, I usually do, but the intention is just to read 3 or 4 verses. Verse 47 says, "And while he yet spake, lo, Judas, one of the 12, came, and with him a great multitude, with swords and staves, from the chief priest and the elders of the people. Now he that betrayed him gave them a sign, saying, Whomsoever I shall kiss, that same is he, hold him fast. And forthwith he came to Jesus and said, Hail, Master, and kissed him. And Jesus said unto him, Friend, wherefore art thou come? Then came they and laid hands on Jesus and took him." We actually finished last week, I think we were in the Gospel of John, noticing some of the extra details that John gives us. By and large, Matthew summarizes. He summarizes a lot. That's not unusual. Every writer of the Gospel had to summarize and leave out some things. It is interesting how each writer seems to focus in particular on certain areas. John gave much more information concerning what took place in the upper room than any other writer. Matthew gives us much more details as the sermons of Jesus. Matthew chapter 5 through 9, the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 24 and 25, the conversation that he had with his disciples concerning the end time. So each writer picks the areas that they want to focus on. The Holy Spirit picked the areas for the writers to focus on. But Matthew is more or less summarizing. So more happened. We read in the book of John that when at some point while this was taking place, while Judas was coming up, kissing Jesus on the cheek, Jesus asked the question, Whom do you seek? They answered, We're seeking Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus' answer, according to John, was, I am he. Pointed out last week, he is in italics, which means it's not in the original language. What he actually said was, I am. And when he made that statement, they got knocked backwards. I don't know how long it took them to recuperate and get back up, but they get back up and the scene replays itself. With the exception that when Jesus gives the answer, his statement is slightly different. I've already told you that I am he. And nobody gets knocked down at that particular time. So that's happened somewhere in this barrage of events as well. Pick back up in verse number 51 and notice Peter's attempted rescue. That takes place probably after everybody got knocked on their backsides. Verse number 51. And behold, one of them, which were with Jesus, stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck a servant of the high priest and smote off his ear. Matthew's very graceful. He doesn't mention Peter by name. It's interesting, often the writers don't tell us who it was that did this. I don't know why. Other writers do, some don't, but maybe Matthew just had the thought, I'll spare Peter of any further embarrassment because it was a most embarrassing event for him. But John makes it clear it was Peter. John chapter 18, verse number 10. And Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and smote the high priest's ear and cut off his right ear. And the servant's name was Malchus. So we not only know who it was that pulled the sword, we know what ear he lobbed off, and we know the name of the man whose ear got lobbed off. So Peter is doing what Peter had pledged to Jesus he would do. Peter in the upper room, Jesus made the prophecy, before the cock crows 3 times, you'll deny me 3 times. Peter made the statement in the upper room, I will not, I will die with you. And that's Peter's intention. Peter's intention is to deliver Jesus from his accusers. Now, there is no doubt he knew he couldn't win. All right? He told us in the book of Luke they had 2 swords. So there's 11 disciples now, but they've only got 2 swords. And this is probably the the temple guards that are coming up with Judas. They're all well armed. They've got swords and staves and lanterns and shields. And so there is no winning this, but Peter's not afraid to die. He's willing to die. So one thing we need to make clear when we talk about Peter and what took place with Peter that night, Peter was not a coward. Sometimes we kind of get the idea that he was a coward. He denied Jesus 3 times. He wasn't a coward. It was Jesus that stopped Peter from doing what Peter had pledged he would do. But at the same time, you need to learn that there's 2 kinds of courage. There's the kind of courage that causes a man to be willing to die in a battle. That's one kind of courage. Soldiers go into battle, and they're willing to die in the heat of that battle, or else they'd be turning and running. But then there's an entirely different kind of courage, and that kind of courage is to die without a battle, just to surrender yourself and give up your life. Peter had the first kind of courage. He was willing to die in battle for Jesus. And I'm not so sure that every one of the remaining 11 disciples would not have died with Jesus had he not stopped them. But none of them, on that night at least, had the courage just to lay down their life. So there's 2 kinds of courage. Peter obviously had the first. It doesn't appear as though he had the second. All right? Read on. What did stop him? Pick up at verse number 52. Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword into his place. For all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? So you got to note here, he was a whacking. Now, Peter's a fisherman, he's not a swordsman. Moral lesson, fishermen don't make good swordsmen. I'm sure he wasn't aiming for the man's ear. I'm sure he was wanting to split his head open like a watermelon. Not very good aim. God preserved his aim because all he cut off was one of his ears. But it was Jesus who must have stepped in between Peter and those soldiers who were surely about to slay Peter. Because this guard is not just going to stand idle while Peter is swinging a sword and people's heads are being aimed at. We think sometimes about Jesus, our intercessor, and he is. He's the one who stands between us and God. He pleads for us. He seeks our forgiveness. On that night, in my mind, I picture he was a physical advocate. He literally stood in between Peter and the swordsman, and that was the only reason why Peter didn't die that night, and that was the only reason why I think probably a full brawl of some sort didn't end that night. So Jesus stops what Peter had pledged to do. I'm going to die with you. That's not what Jesus wanted. And so Jesus stops him. He tells him to put his sword up into his sheath. And then he makes this statement. Do you not understand that right now I could call 12 legions of angels? 12 legions. Through the years, I've read and tried to figure out what a legion was. And I've come up with different answers. Different sources sometimes give different answers, which makes me think at different times in the Roman Empire, it was probably a different number. Roman Empire lasted for hundreds of years, and so I'm sure they restructured their military every once in a while. So maybe what a legion was in this century is not what a legion was in that century. But the most common figure I come up with is 6,000. 6,000 seems to be the most common figure, which means Jesus didn't just spit out any number. This was not a random number. He could have said, do you not realize I could call thousands of legions? Now that would be a random number. That would be a number that has no numerical significance. It's like when Jesus said, I say not 7 times, but 7 times 7. Talking about how many times should you forgive. That's just an abstract number. It does equal 49, but we know we're not going to count 49 times that we forgive somebody. But he picked an unusual number, 12 legions, which means Jesus was saying I could easily call 72,000 angels to my side. Now, that's not all the angels there are. Obviously not. Why he picked that number, I don't know. But he picked that number for a purpose that I just don't know what the purpose is. But 72,000 angels that I could call. The Bible goes on to tell us that Jesus stopped this, that the Bible passage might be fulfilled. Verse number 56. But all this was done that the scriptures of the prophet might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook and fled. Jesus himself had quoted Zechariah earlier in the upper room when he made the prophecy of the 12 disciples, the 11 disciples. He said, "This night all of you shall flee." And he was quoting from the Old Testament that the shepherd will be smitten and the sheep will be scattered. So this is the fulfillment of that. But let me interject something, and this is something I think it's kind of important for us as Baptists to reacquaint ourselves with. Jesus is fulfilling these prophecies right now, and there is a way that God intends to fulfill every prophecy. But we should never get to the place where we think this is the only way God could have done it. When the Bible makes the statement, He did this to fulfill the prophecy, it's an absolute true statement. He did this to fulfill this prophecy. But then some folks get the idea, well, if He hadn't done this, the whole plan of God would have fallen apart. No, it wouldn't. I mean, God could fulfill any prophecy at any time in any manner that He wishes to fulfill that prophecy. Sometimes I think we get this notion in our mind, everything's predestined to happen. Everything has to happen this way, this time, in this manner. I'm not sure that that's true. I've mentioned to you before, we don't know how many times God set the stage up only to allow it to be tore back down again when it comes to prophecy. We're looking for Jesus to come right now. And things in the Middle East kind of make us think, hey, it could happen soon. Well, it could, but this is just one of many times where the stage has been set. God may tear it back down now. God may let it go on. It's not that it has been predestined what will happen. It is, God knows what will happen, and He's told us what will happen. But if it doesn't happen now, it's no big deal because it's going to happen. God's not obligated to do anything in the way we think He's obligated to do it. So the fact that He makes this statement doesn't mean it had to happen then. It means God knew it was going to happen then. And that's a little bit different in the two statements. Questions? Okay, so He's fulfilling prophecy. Deliberately, He's stopping Peter so all of His disciples don't get executed. Bible actually tells us more took place. Mark gives us an extra detail somewhere around now, and I'm just guessing when it happened. You don't have to turn, but Matthew and Mark give us the most details of this particular event now. John gave us the more with Matthew earlier, but Mark chapter 14, verse number 50 says, "And they all forsook Him and fled. And there followed Him a certain young man having a linen cloth cast about his naked body. And the young man laid hold on him. The young men laid hold on him. And he left the linen cloth and fled from them naked." Now, as far as we know, there's only 11 disciples up there on the Mount of Olives with Jesus. We went from the upper room, Last Supper, where He had His 12 disciples. Judas leaves. That leaves 11. That same 11 went out of the upper room, went over to the Mount of Olives. The Bible tells us He left this group out here to sit. He took 3 with Him out to pray. He went and prayed by Himself. So the total's still 11. And as far as we know, that group's not growing any. So this young man that fled had to be one of the 11. Mark knew who it was. He chose not to tell us who it was. So I don't guess we ought to be guessing. We usually do. But I don't guess we ought to be guessing because He didn't give us that information. But you begin to see how frightened people became as a result of what was happening, and Jesus is stopping them from doing what they were prepared to do. They were prepared to die in battle. They weren't prepared just to surrender their lives and die. And so now you see this young man, he had a cloak on him. Doesn't necessarily mean he was completely naked underneath. He probably had a loincloth or something like that. Most men would have something wrapped around on the inside of that coat in case something did happen. But in God's eyes, that's still naked. I know a lot of folks question what I believe about mixed bathing and going to swim, but the Bible makes it clear you don't have to be raw naked to be what God calls naked, and that's immodest. And I think we show way too much skin, giving way too little thought to what it is that we're doing. So more than likely, he had probably what you would call a bathing suit on. It was a loincloth wrapped around him, Bible still calls it naked, and the Bible indicates he was so frightened, he fled away without any clothes on. So the level of scare has grown tremendously, and it's something that's among all 12 of the disciples. Not just Peter, it's something that's among all 12. So the Bible goes on. Verse number 57 begins to describe the trials or the interrogations. The word trials is a word that's usually used quite often. I don't know if that's the proper word or not, but the interrogations is what is actually taking place. Verse number 57. And they that laid hold on Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. Again, Matthew's summarizing. He's not giving us all the details. People look at one gospel, and if it doesn't agree with the other gospel, they think there's contradictions in the Bible. No contradictions in the Bible. What we have is stories being summarized. John actually gives us the details of what happened first. John chapter 18, verse 13 says, and led him away to Annas first, for he was father-in-law to Caiaphas, which was the high priest that same year. So they arrest him. Matthew doesn't give us this detail at all. John does. They didn't take him first to the judgment of hewn stone. That's the name of the place where he should have been taken. That was the judgment hall. It was named the judgment of hewn stone. It was literally a carved out cave where some of these kind of judgments were issued at. They didn't take him there. Instead, they took him to Annas' house. Well, you say, who in the world is Annas? Annas is father-in-law to Caiaphas, the high priest. He was the high priest. Technically, he's no longer the high priest. But history seems to indicate he still controlled the office of the high priest. Caiaphas was his son-in-law. And besides Caiaphas, other of his children became high priest. The office of high priest was no longer given because you were a son of Aaron in the line of the Aaronic, I don't know if that's the way you should say it or not, but in the line of Aaron's descendants. Instead, it was a bought position. It was a purchased position. So the high priest paid for the privilege to be the high priest. Annas had paid a good salary for that position, and when it was time for him to step down, it would appear as though he paid for his children to have that position. The fact that Jesus was first taken to Annas' house before Caiaphas indicates who was actually in charge. Caiaphas may have been the high priest, but that's not where they took Jesus to. So there's actually three groups that have a part in the interrogation of Jesus. Number one, there's Annas. Number two, there's Caiaphas. And the Bible indicates that while Caiaphas was doing his interrogation, the Sanhedrin were there too. The Sanhedrin were the people that were supposed to do these kind of interrogations. They're 70 in number. As far as I know, they were all Jews. As far as I know, they were all legitimately placed in that position. But they did seem to be yes man to the high priest, or maybe to Annas. The position actually was born out of the Old Testament. Moses said, these people are too many for me. I can't lead them. God said, well, pull out 70 men, and I'll put of your spirit onto those 70 men. And Israel kept the theory behind that, the 70 men. So these were the 70 men of Israel during that time that were supposed to do the judgment of the nations. Well, the Bible's telling us in John that he first went to Annas. You don't know it unless you read outside of the Bible, but a lot of laws are being broken with what the high priest and the Sanhedrin are doing. Not so much biblical laws, but laws relating to Israel's justice system. For example, nobody was supposed to be interrogated in anyone's private home. That was illegal. It broke Jewish law, okay? Jewish civil law. But where was Jesus taken? He was taken first to Annas' house. Second one that comes to mind is nobody is to be tried without defense. Jesus had no defense. He defended himself by saying nothing and making one or two statements, but he had no counsel at all. And there was another one that I had in the tip of my mind, but it's fallen out. It'll probably bounce back up in a minute. But what you're seeing is the Jews are, the other one was you can't try a man during the night. All trials had to be done during the day. And so what you're seeing here is it's a manipulation of the system so that they could get Jesus on the cross. And I know I have said this a lot, but I think their entire goal was to have him on the cross before Israel woke up the next morning, because they didn't want to do it during this busy time of the year because they feared that the people would cause an uproar. So the plan is, let's do it tonight. Let's get him on the cross as soon as we can, and then it's too late for anybody to stop anything. Questions? I know I'm bouncing around giving you a lot of thoughts, but he goes to Annas first. I suspect that if a decision hadn't been made, Annas made it when Jesus was in his presence. And everything else is just Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin putting the rubber stamp on what Annas has already decided, because they took him to Annas' house first, okay? No questions? It would appear as though Annas is the one who's in charge, not Caiaphas. All right, we keep reading. Where did we leave off at? Verse number 57? 58. Bible says, but Peter followed him from afar off unto the high priest's palace and went in and sat with the servants to see the end. I told you they took him to Annas' house first. John tells us that. After Annas finished, they did send him to Caiaphas. And now they probably are in the judgment of hewn stone. They're probably in the right location. I think that verse tells us, no, that verse doesn't. It just says with the servants. But verse 59 tells us, now the chief priest and elders and all the councils sought false witnesses against Jesus to put him to death. So when he gets taken from Annas' house to Caiaphas' house, now it's still not legal. There's no defense. It's still during the dark, but now he's before the right body and he's in the right place. However, the decision's already been made. And I think, again, Annas made the decision. Verse number 59, they sought false witnesses against Jesus to put him to death. They're not trying to find out whether he's guilty or not. They're trying to condemn him because they think he is guilty, right? So this isn't exactly how justice is supposed to work. It's how it worked for Jesus on that particular night. Verse number 60, but found none. Yea, though many false witnesses came, yet found they none. At the last came two false witnesses and said, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days. Are you familiar with that Bible passage? If you read that Bible passage, you would think what those two men thought. But what you ought to think is he wasn't talking about the Jewish temple. He was talking about his temple. Destroy this temple. He was talking about his body. You destroy this temple, and in 3 days, I'll raise it up. So I don't want to say that. I started to say these are the first Baptists to take a verse out of context, but they're probably not completely taking it out of context. They're definitely misinterpreting what this verse implied. And that really wasn't enough to condemn a man anyway. I guess maybe if you just want to protect the temple, it could have been. But at any rate, that was the best charge that they came up with, and they had to pay somebody for that. Verse number 62. And the high priest arose and said unto him, answerest thou nothing? What is it which these witness against thee? But Jesus held his peace. And the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee by the living God, that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus saith unto him, thou hast said. Nevertheless, I say unto you, hereafter shall you see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. I have no idea what hour of the night it is. We talked last week about the fact we don't really know what hour he was arrested. We can speculate. My speculation is 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that. Now it's getting towards the early part of the morning. I don't know how long they've drilled him. Went to Annas' house first. There was something done over there. The Bible doesn't give us very much in the way of details. Now they're at Caiaphas. The Sanhedrin's supposed to be questioning. They've gone out and hired witnesses. Hey, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Who do you hire at 2 o'clock in the morning to tell lies? I don't know. But they've had to go roust up witnesses and pay witnesses to come and to lie. And it would appear as though now Caiaphas is just getting tired of it all. So he just asked Jesus, are you the Son of God or not? Just tell us plainly. And Jesus answers. His answer is, thou sayest. And that's pretty much the same thing as saying, in our vernacular, you said it. And you can interpret that basically any way you want to. You can interpret that, well, you said it and it's true. Or you could interpret it, well, that's what you say. So that's not the best testimony. That's not the best affirmation that Jesus gave that he's the Son of God. It is an affirmation. He's not denying it. But it's not the best. He could have just said, I am the Son of God. What he did say adds to it. He said, you're going to see the Son of Man return in all of his glory. I went back and counted 30 different times in the book of Matthew. Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man. 30 different times in this book, he refers to himself as the Son of Man. I don't know if those people, the Jewish leaders, would have known that or not, but he is making the statement when he gives this prophecy, you're going to see me come back in the glory of the Father with all the angels. That is, even in my opinion, a stronger affirmation of who he is than the statement, thou said it, because that's kind of left open to interpretation. But between these two statements, that was really all that Caiaphas needed. The Bible tells us in the next verse, he's satisfied. Verse number 62. And the high priest arose and said unto him, excuse me, I've already read that verse. Verse 65. And the high priest rent his clothes, saying, he hath spoken blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses? Behold, now ye have heard his blasphemy. What think ye? They answered and said, he is guilty of death. Not much of a trial. It broke the laws. But with that statement that Jesus made, that was enough for Caiaphas to condemn him. So in their minds, the trial is over. So this would be what I would call the Jewish trials or the Jewish interrogations. Most people call them as three: Annas, Caiaphas, and Sanhedrin, although it greatly appears as though the Sanhedrin were a part of Caiaphas's interrogation. Questions? All right, so there's a series of trials that are Jewish. Now, the Bible tells us that from here on, Jesus more or less seems to be beaten, and I'm going to say through the rest of the night. When we went over to Israel, both times we went to Israel, they took us to a place and they said, down in the dungeon of Caiaphas's place, of the palace, and they said this would be the place that Jesus would have been held at from the time that they finished interrogating him. Caiaphas finished interrogating him till the sun came up and they took him over to Pilate. And I suppose that would be the place where he would have been taken if that actually happened. But I'm not sure that actually happened. I'm not sure there was ever a lull where Jesus was taken to a cell and left for any period of time while they waited to take him to Pilate. In my mind, we're leaving the night, we're in the early hours of the day, and literally it's not long until the sun comes up. By the time you go to Annas, by the time you go to Caiaphas, and by the time these soldiers finish doing what they're doing, I've got a notion they probably just kept slapping Jesus around until it was time to take him over to Pilate's house. Because all of the gospel writers make it clear that Jesus was abused for what I would say would be a prolonged period of time. Verse number 67, and they did spit in his face and buffeted him And others smote him with the palms of their hand, saying, Prophesy unto us, thou Christ, who is he that smote thee? I think it would have been nice if they had stuck him in prison for an hour or two and let him rest. I just don't think anything nice happened to Jesus that night. I got a feeling from the time that they decreed, Caiaphas decreed his guilt, to the time when they took Jesus over to Pilate, I've got the idea these soldiers just, and this would be the this would be the Jewish temple guard. He's still in the custody of the Jews right now. So this would be the temple guards. And it would appear as though they were just abusive with him, in my mind, until it was time to take him over to Pilate's place the next morning. Questions? Thoughts? Yes?
It didn't matter what Jesus would have said. He knew what he had to do. He could have just been silent, and they would have still done the same thing.
Yeah.
But he knew what he had to do, so any defense was not necessary. It wasn't going to change. So I would say he's a wordsmith, but it's like he was guilty when he went in there, and he knew what he had to do. So he could have just been blank, and it would have been the same outcome.
Yeah, he offered no defense. Isaiah 53 says he was led as a lamb to the slaughter. A lamb don't fight back. Bulls might. I mean, I don't know. You have to kind of trick a bull, I guess. But lambs, they just kind of follow where they're supposed to go, and they don't pay much attention to what's going on around them. So Jesus offered really no defense. He just made the one statement, you've said it, which in my mind doesn't really confirm or deny. It seems to me, whatever you think, it's as if Jesus is taking, well, you do what you want to do. He doesn't seem to encourage them, and he doesn't seem to stop them. He's just letting them do what sinful men want to do. And like I said, to me, the strongest statement that he made was the statement, you're going to see me coming back, and it's going to be different. Round two, going to be different. And that's basically the only words that he uttered. He will speak a little bit more to Pilate when we get to the Roman interrogations. Won't answer Herod a single word. Not one single syllable did he say to Herod. So he was led as a lamb before the shears is dumb. Any others? Let's read a little bit further. Matthew uses this opportunity after the sentence has been passed to update us on what's been going on with Peter. Matthew chapter 26. I'm going to read all the way to the end of the chapter. Now Peter sat without in the palace, and a damsel came unto him, saying, Thou also wast with Jesus of Galilee. But he denied before them all, saying, I know not what thou sayest. And when he was gone out unto the porch, another maid saw him, and said unto them that were there, This fellow was also with Jesus of Nazareth. And again he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. And after a while came unto him they that stood by, and said to Peter, Surely thou also art one of them, for thy speech bewrayeth thee. Then began he to curse and to swear, saying, I know not the man. And immediately the cock crew. And Peter remembered the words of Jesus, which said unto him, Before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And he went out and wept bitterly. Matthew chapter 26, verse number 34 is where Jesus made that prophecy at. Just notice how the character, the demeanor, the courage of Peter had left. The first one that accuses him is a damsel. One of the Bibles tell us it's the damsel that kept the door. I'm not sure what door they're talking about. Might have been the door to come into this place. The Gospel of John tells us that one of the disciples who knew the high priest spoke to the damsel at the door to let Peter gain access, which would mean one of the 11 disciples had connections, somehow knew the high priest. Probably that was John. It's recorded in John's gospel, and John never mentions himself. He always refers to himself in the third person. And so it's quite probable that John was there and that John spoke to have Peter admitted. And it would appear as perhaps that was the damsel, the one who was opening the door to let him in, recognized him right off. You're him. You're part of that. No, I'm not. Simple denial. Time passes. All of this is going to take some time. I don't know how much time, but it's going to take some time. He goes up to the fire. One of the gospel tells us he's warming himself by the fire. And then apparently another damsel, I got a feeling, based on what the Gospels say, I got a feeling that the first damsel went and got another damsel. So these two maids come to Peter together and accuse Peter. And the Bible says this time he doesn't just deny, but he swears. I swear, I don't know this man. And while he's gathered around the fire, the other guys are listening. Apparently he's talking. He's conversing with these, and these would be not Roman, but Jewish guards and Jewish accusers of Jesus. And they're talking, and Peter has had enough conversation. Hey, you're one of them too. Your speech betrays you. And I don't know by that, they mean he had a Galilean accent. That should not have betrayed him, because many of the Jews were Galilean. And during this time, the Passover, many of the Jews from Galilee would have come down, so that shouldn't have been anything that was uncommon. But based on Peter's reaction, third time, the Bible says he began to curse and to swear. Well, sometimes we confuse those two words, but to swear is to make an oath. To curse is to use profanity. I got a feeling as he was talking around that fire, it's the middle of the night, just a bunch of guys hanging out, Peter wasn't being profane. Everybody else probably was. And there's a mark of those that belong to Jesus. Their speech ought to be different. They ought not be profane. And I've got a feeling after they heard him talk and after they saw that maid accuse him, they began to say, hey, there's more truth to this than what you're letting on. You've got to be one of them. The way you're talking, the purity of your talk, the decency of the words that you're using, it's giving you away. And so Peter, in an effort to persuade them that he was not a follower of Jesus, didn't just deny Jesus, didn't just swear, make an oath that he wasn't Jesus, but he cussed up a storm to let the people know he was not a follower of Jesus. I don't know how you look at that, but I look at that as even the disciples of Jesus demonstrated a difference in their walk with Jesus, and it showed up in every aspect of their life, even in their vocabulary. I understand we pick up a lot of words in the course of life that we just don't realize that we use. And it takes a while to get some bad habits out sometimes. But it ought to be the goal of every Christian to have a speech which marks us like a Christian instead of having a speech that proves. And that's why Peter, I think, did what he did. It proved to them, they didn't bother him anymore after that, it proved to them he must not be a follower of Jesus. And at that moment, come on in, folks. At that moment, the rooster crowed for the third time, and Peter went off and wept. Last call. Questions? People are beating down the door trying to get in, so I got to hush. All right, let's pray together. Father, we thank you for the day. Thank you for the opportunity to study your book. Pray that you make it real to us and make us real to you. God, make genuine Christians out of us. We'll do our best to follow you and obey you, for we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Stand up and move around for a while.